of our daughter while you go ahead and do whatever the you want.
John Carter, seen and heard screaming at his current wife.
Yeah, you pushed a load of my buttons, thank you. I want you to stop acting like a every day.
This is one piece of evidence prosecutors collected during their investigation into Katelyn Markham's death.
They broke into an argument. He said before he knew it, he had her pinned down to the ground. He was on top of her, and he choked her. And then after he choked her, he said he was panicking, and he said he didn't know what to do. He was going to call the cops. He didn't want to call the cops. He said he made it look like it was a suicidal gesture, so he cut her wrist.
13 years of denial, a decomposing body in the woods, chilling poetry, and an infuriating sentence: 3 years in prison for the killer. The Katelyn Markham case is not just a tragedy about a young woman's unjust death, but also a stinging slap in the face from the justice system. The perpetrator, John Carter, her fiancé, who played the role of a heartbroken lover, deceived everyone. When denied early release, he chose to stay in prison rather than reveal the truth about that horrific night.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine.
We want people to get to know her instead of just getting to know the face that was on all of these missing posters.
The resolution of the Katelyn Markham case delivered what can only be described as a profound shock to the justice system, exposing a deeply infuriating reality about how the law can sometimes fail the victims it is sworn to protect. At the center of this agonizing ordeal is John Carter, a man whose sheer stubbornness and remorseless nature have continuously inflicted psychological torment upon Katelyn's grieving family. For over a decade, Carter successfully hid behind the carefully crafted facade of a mourning fiancé, evading the severe consequences of his actions. However, the most recent developments in this tragic saga have proven to be the most maddening chapters yet, showcasing a killer who remains unapologetically defiant until the bitter end. The foundation of this widespread public outrage stems from an incredibly bitter and hard-to-swallow plea agreement. After 13 agonizing years of dodging accountability, playing the victim, and watching Katelyn's family suffer through relentless searches and heartbreaking false hopes, Carter finally found himself cornered by investigators. Yet, instead of facing a jury for a murder charge which could have potentially put him behind bars for life, he and his legal defense team managed to orchestrate a devastatingly lenient plea deal. Carter agreed to plead guilty to the lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter. By doing so, he successfully sidestepped the much more severe murder conviction. The resulting punishment was a maximum sentence that felt like an absolute insult to Katelyn's memory: a meager 3 years in prison. For the family, friends, and an entire community that had spent over a decade fighting for justice, watching a confessed killer receive a mere 36 months for taking a vibrant young life was a crushing, almost incomprehensible blow. But Carter's audacity did not end at his sentencing hearing. As the calendar turned to early 2026, he attempted yet another manipulative legal maneuver. Believing he had served enough time, or perhaps viewing himself as a model inmate deserving of leniency, Carter filed a motion seeking an early release from his already brief prison term. This audacious attempt to walk free prematurely sparked a renewed wave of outrage across the community. Fortunately, the judicial system did not grant him this final insult. The presiding judge firmly rejected Carter's bid for early parole, keeping him locked firmly behind bars. Perhaps the most chilling and deeply frustrating aspect of these recent events, however, is Carter's absolute refusal to provide the one thing the Markham family truly needs: closure. In a dramatic turn during the early release negotiations, the prosecution laid down a final, desperate offer. They proposed a path to early release on one strict condition: Carter had to finally provide a detailed, truthful confession about exactly what happened on the night Katelyn was killed. He was offered a chance at freedom in exchange for the truth. Shockingly, Carter flat out refused the deal. He made the calculated decision that he would rather sit in a prison cell than offer any explanation, apology, or transparency regarding his heinous crime. By choosing incarceration over a confession, Carter cemented his legacy as a deeply cruel and unrepentant individual. He has deliberately chosen to take the dark secrets of that fatal night to his grave, leaving a grieving family to live out the rest of their days without ever knowing the full story of how their beloved daughter was taken from them.
Body camera and cruiser cam video this afternoon. Carter was arrested on Wednesday at his workplace in Forest Park. Katelyn Markham disappeared from Fairfield in 2011. Her remains were discovered in Indiana in 2013.
While Part 1 focused on the maddening legal outcome of the case, Part 2 peels back the layers of John Carter's deception to expose the truly horrifying monster that lay hidden beneath the mask of the grieving fiancé. Appropriately titled, The Demon Within, this segment delves into the blood-chilling revelations that surfaced during the investigation, finally unmasking Carter's genuine, twisted nature. These discoveries did not merely provide a motive, they painted a picture of a calculated, depraved individual who was not only obsessed with death, but was also specifically fantasizing about the destruction of the woman he supposedly loved. The evidence uncovered during a detailed search of Carter's primary residence provided the shocking proof that shattered his carefully maintained facade of innocence and heartbroken partner. Perhaps the most disturbing window into Carter's psychopathic mind was found in journals and notes hidden within his belongings. Investigators executed a search warrant on the property, where he lived at the time of Katelyn's disappearance, discovering what can only be described as bloody poetry. These were not expressions of romantic longing but rather explicit, internal monologues praising violence and romanticizing the death of his partner. One deeply haunting passage explicitly read, in part,
"Deep down, I love her. You want to kill her. But I love her. She must die. I can't kill her. Yes, you can. No. Yes. How do you talk me into all these things? I'm just that good. But you're bad. I know. How do I kill you? You can't. You're right. About what? Nothing."
This chilling, internal dialogue about murdering Katelyn provided undeniable proof of premeditation and a complete lack of remorse, exposing a man twisted by an obsession with taking her life. Even more terrifying than these generalized fantasies of murder was a specific, horrifying signature discovered within Carter's home, one that provided a direct, indisputable link to the physical injuries inflicted upon Katelyn. Scribbled on a door, investigators found a graphic and deeply disturbing message in his handwriting. "I slit your wrists with the key to your heart." When Katelyn's skeletal remains were finally discovered in an Indiana dumping ground, forensic anthropologists found a bone-chilling parallel to this very phrase.
Went by without a trace. Search parties continued throughout the community. Nearly 2 years after her disappearance, her remains were found in April of 2013 in a remote wooded area in Cedar Grove, Indiana.
I think a lot of people want to know the truth and the real story. What happened to Katelyn?
Her left wrist bone displayed 4 clean, precise cuts caused by sharp force trauma. The poetry was no longer abstract art, it was a direct blueprint for the heinous physical trauma he inflicted upon her body. This terrifying parallel provided the smoking gun that linked Carter's darkest, innermost thoughts directly to Katelyn's final agony and the desecration of her corpse. Beyond the psychological evidence, police also uncovered crucial physical traces that further cemented Carter's guilt and meticulous disposal plan.
That happens to be one of the roadblocks, one of many roadblocks, preventing a really great resolution as of now in the case.
During the search, investigators located a large roll of black construction or landscaping nylon sheeting hidden on his property. When Katelyn's remains were finally found, they were encased in that exact same distinctive material. This was not a common household item, but specific tools used for disposal, linking the crime scene directly back to Carter's primary residence. This mountain of damning evidence, from the twisted poetry to the exact tools used to wrap her body, collectively shattered his defense, making the infuriating final legal outcome of only 3 years seem even more incomprehensible to a community demanding true justice. While the physical evidence against John Carter was undeniably chilling, the sheer psychological endurance required to maintain his innocence for over 13 years remains one of the most disturbing elements of this case. This segment delves into Carter's meticulously crafted cover-up, a decade-long charade where he weaponized grief to deflect suspicion. From the very moment Katelyn Markham vanished, Carter seamlessly stepped into the role of the ultimate victim, a heartbroken fiancé desperate to find his missing love. Yet, when closely examined, his performance was a masterclass in manipulation, riddled with calculated maneuvers designed solely for his own self-preservation. The foundation of his elaborate theatrical performance was laid almost immediately with a highly suspect 911 call. Instead of sounding like a panicked partner genuinely searching for answers, Carter's reporting of her disappearance was fundamentally flawed. He provided unsolicited alibis, detailed exactly what she had supposedly left behind, and most tellingly, immediately deflected blame. Within hours of her disappearance, he was already pointing fingers at questionable people, attending a nearby carnival, planting a false narrative to lead investigators astray.
My fiancé is missing. I can't find her anywhere.
Where was she at midnight last night when you left?
She was at her house. She was going to bed. She wasn't going out to do anything, so she would have been in her bed. And I mean, I've been with her for 6 years. She's not deceiving, you know. She doesn't.
Okay, and you guys didn't have an argument or anything?
Not at all.
Furthermore, his initial contact with Katelyn's father, Dave Markham, was equally theatrical. Rather than calling to ask if Katelyn was visiting her family, Carter simply screamed into the phone that she was gonna deliberate, dramatic performance designed to establish his own fabricated shock, rather than to gather logical information about her whereabouts.
And screamed in my ear immediately, Katelyn's missing.
For the years that followed, Carter doubled down on his deceptive narrative, feeding a tragic public facade that successfully hoodwinked the entire Fairfield community. He boldly embedded himself in the very center of the tragedy. Carter actively participated in massive community search efforts, bravely faced television news cameras to deliver impassioned, desperate pleas for her safe return, and handed out missing person flyers to strangers. When Katelyn's skeletal remains were ultimately discovered 20 months later, he stood at her funeral, weeping alongside her devastated family, and delivered a heartbreaking speech about the marriage and children they would never have. He stood shoulder to shoulder with the people whose lives he had utterly destroyed, wearing a mask of profound sorrow that effectively manipulated public sympathy and kept him walking free. However, the ultimate truth about Carter's emotional capacity was exposed during the final hours of his legal battle. As legal representatives for the Markham family astutely noted, John Carter had never actually shed a single tear of genuine sorrow for Katelyn over the course of 13 years. His emotional displays were entirely self-serving. It was only when he was finally cornered, standing just weeks away from a high-stakes murder trial that could have resulted in a life sentence, that he truly broke down. The tears he wept while accepting the last-minute involuntary manslaughter plea deal were not born of guilt, remorse, or the agonizing weight of his unforgivable actions. Rather, they were tears of sheer terror and cowardice. He wept only for himself, definitively proving that his decade-long performance was never about love, but entirely about surviving the consequences of the horrific crime he had committed. Before understanding the horrific extent of John Carter's deception, one must first understand the brilliant light he so callously extinguished. Katelyn Markham was a vibrant, deeply loved 21-year-old graphic arts student studying at the Art Institute of Ohio. Described by everyone who knew her as bubbly, fiercely pragmatic, and incredibly talented, she was just days away from celebrating her 22nd birthday and completing her college degree. To the outside world, Katelyn was standing on the precipice of a beautiful, promising future. She was working part-time at a local bridal shop, actively planning her own wedding, and preparing for an exciting cross-country move to Colorado. She was a young woman who radiated warmth and creativity, leaving a lasting impression of joy on anyone she met. However, Behind the carefully curated public image of high school sweethearts destined for a happily ever after lay a deeply toxic and suffocating reality. While Carter proudly paraded their relationship as a perfect romance, Katelyn had tearfully confided in close friends that she felt entirely trapped in a waking nightmare. The relationship had severely deteriorated over the previous 6 months. She was thoroughly exhausted by Carter's intense jealousy, his heavy narcotics habit, and his highly controlling nature. More alarmingly, Katelyn admitted she was no longer physically attracted to him and felt deeply disturbed by his excessive consumption of pornography and the deviant intimate acts he actively pressured her to engage in. She had finally reached her absolute breaking point. Katelyn was silently formulating an exit strategy, desperately wanting to call off the engagement and escape his suffocating grip. But she tragically ran out of time before she could safely break free. This simmering, unspoken tension inevitably boiled over into violence on the fateful night of August 13, 2011. What exactly transpired in the late hours of that summer evening remains a dark secret Carter selfishly refuses to share, but the silent aftermath painted a highly suspicious and terrifying picture. When Katelyn failed to show up for her shift at the bridal shop the following day, an act completely out of character for the highly responsible and punctual student, alarm bells immediately began to ring among her friends and family. The scene left behind at her Fairfield townhouse was chilling precisely because of how undisturbed it appeared. There were absolutely no signs of a physical struggle, a robbery, or forced entry. Her car remained parked securely in the driveway. Inside the pristine apartment, her purse, identification, and keys were left sitting out, completely untouched. Most telling of all, her beloved dog, whom she treated like family and would never willingly abandon, was left roaming the property alone. The only item missing from Katelyn's life was her cell phone. Investigators later uncovered a sinister digital footprint. Shortly after midnight, her phone abruptly went dark. Whether it was forcefully powered down, the battery was removed, or the SIM card was destroyed, that abrupt disconnection severed her from the world forever. The eerie stillness of her apartment was not the scene of a runaway. It was the silent, undisturbed aftermath of a fatal ambush.
This has been a long time coming. Long time.
In the heart of Fairfield, Ohio, summer break was winding down. The clanking sounds of carnival rides at the Sacred Heart Festival echoed throughout the neighborhood. Yet, half a mile away from the enticing aroma of corn dogs and cotton candy, a mystery was about to unfold.
Hi, my name is John Carter. I am calling, I know that you're not supposed to report a missing person before 24 hours, but my fiancé is missing. I can't find her anywhere.
Okay, where did you see her last?
I saw her at like 12 o'clock last night. She stays in a house by herself, I'm really nervous. Her car is still there.
John Carter's fiancée, Katelyn Markham, would never be seen again. Instead of celebrating Katelyn's 22nd birthday, friends and family ramped up search efforts, despite Fairfield police saying there was no indication of foul play.
Katelyn is the love of my life. I've been with her for 6 years. We've been engaged for a year. Today would be exactly a year.
While Carter's public performance was Oscar-worthy, the relentless scrutiny of private investigators and law enforcement slowly began to expose massive, fatal flaws in his narrative.
Say what they're gonna say. You can't stop them. They don't know me. And I know me. I know that I would never hurt Katelyn ever in a million years.
As years turned into a decade, a mountain of circumstantial evidence accumulated, systematically tearing down his carefully constructed alibi. Though there was no immediate smoking gun left behind at Katelyn's pristine apartment, Carter's own words, physical demeanor, and digital footprint ultimately betrayed him, leaving a trail of undeniable red flags that investigators simply could not ignore. The most persistent indicator of his underlying guilt came from his disastrous performance during lie detector tests. Over the course of a decade, Carter voluntarily submitted to 3 separate polygraph examinations administered by authorities, first in 2011, again in 2014, and finally in 2021. He failed all 3. polygraph experts consistently noted that he displayed highly deceptive physiological responses, particularly when he was directly asked if he knew what happened to Katelyn, or if he had personally disposed of her body. While polygraph results are famously inadmissible in a criminal court of law, they provided a vital investigative compass, confirming to detectives that Carter was hiding a remarkably dark secret and keeping him firmly squarely in their crosshairs. Beyond the failed polygraphs, physical anomalies and digital data further shattered his story. In the immediate aftermath of Katelyn's disappearance, police officers noted visible, vertical red scratches down Carter's neck. When questioned about the fresh wounds, he nervously blamed a clumsy shaving accident with an electric razor, a flimsy excuse that defied basic logic and strongly suggested a desperate physical struggle for survival. More damning, however, was a catastrophic chronological error in his alibi that a determined private investigator eventually uncovered. Cell phone records proved that on the night Carter supposedly discovered Katelyn was missing, he was on the phone with a friend while pulling into her driveway. According to the digital logs, Carter hung up with his friend and called Katelyn's father in a screaming panic exactly 38 seconds later. 38 seconds is a physically impossible window of time to park a vehicle, walk across the street to the townhouse, unlock the front door, thoroughly search the premises, realize she was gone, and dial a phone in distress. This crucial 38-second discrepancy strongly suggested that Carter never actually went inside to look for her. He already knew she wasn't there. The final, chilling piece of the puzzle came from the eyewitness testimony of two local teenagers who had sneaked out of their homes during the early morning hours of Katelyn's disappearance. At approximately 2 a.m., they witnessed Carter's distinct red Ford Focus pulling into the garage of his mother's home. In a highly suspicious and calculated maneuver, the car was being driven in total darkness, with its headlights completely turned off to avoid detection. The vehicle remained hidden in the garage for a brief window of time, before backing out and speeding off again into the night. This sinister eyewitness account painted a horrifying picture of a panicked killer utilizing the cover of darkness to frantically conceal a body, completely oblivious to the fact that eyes were watching him from the shadows. For 20 agonizing months, Katelyn Markham's family and friends lived in a suffocating state of limbo, desperately holding on to a fading sliver of hope that the vibrant young woman might still be found alive. However, that fragile hope was brutally shattered, transforming a frantic missing person search into a grim, full-fledged murder investigation. The transition from agonizing uncertainty to devastating reality brought not only unbearable grief, but also a daunting set of legal and investigative obstacles that would plague the pursuit of justice for over a decade. The heartbreaking breakthrough finally occurred in April 2013, effectively ending the grueling, needle in a haystack search that had consumed the community. A couple scouring a remote, wooded creek area along Big Cedar Road in Cedar Grove, Indiana, located approximately 30 miles away from Katelyn's Ohio townhouse, stumbled upon a morbid scene. They discovered a skull and scattered skeletal remains callously discarded in an illegal dumping ground. Dental records soon confirmed the horrifying truth: Katelyn had been found. The condition and placement of her body were highly calculated and deeply sinister. Her skeletonized remains had been deliberately wrapped in heavy black plastic construction sheeting. Even more incriminating was the specific geographic location of this makeshift grave. The remote Indiana dumping site was not randomly chosen. It sat conspicuously along a direct, familiar travel route leading toward a rural farm property owned by John Carter's family. This proximity was far too precise to be dismissed as a mere coincidence, strongly pointing to a killer who intimately knew the surrounding backroads. Despite this monumental discovery, the passage of time had allowed the natural elements to inflict catastrophic damage on the physical evidence, creating an absolute forensic nightmare. Because Katelyn's body had been exposed to the harsh wilderness for nearly 2 years, severe decomposition had taken its toll. Medical examiners and forensic anthropologists could definitively rule her death a homicide, noting the deeply disturbing sharp force trauma, the distinct V-shaped cuts on her left wrist. However, because there was virtually no soft tissue remaining, they were entirely unable to determine the exact, official cause of death. Was she strangled, smothered, or fatally beaten? Science simply could not provide an answer. This agonizing lack of a definitive cause of death created a massive, glaring loophole that Carter's defense attorneys would later eagerly exploit. Without a scientifically proven method of murder, it became exponentially more difficult for prosecutors to convince a jury of premeditated, intentional murder, severely weakening their leverage, and ultimately forcing their hand to accept the heavily reduced plea deal. Compounding the devastating forensic limitations was the mounting public outrage over the initial handling of the investigation. Katelyn's family, alongside seasoned private investigators hired to look into the disappearance, fiercely criticized the local police department for their perceived negligence and superficial early response.
John Carter is not a nice person.
Katelyn's dad, Dave, spoke on behalf of his late daughter during today's hearing.
Let him feel the pain that so many of us have endured for the past 13 years.
In the crucial first 48 hours when Katelyn vanished, authorities hesitated, initially treating the highly responsible 21-year-old as a spontaneous runaway rather than a victim in grave danger. Vital physical evidence at the townhouse was potentially compromised or overlooked, and Carter was not immediately subjected to the intense, immediate interrogation that the last person to see a victim alive typically warrants. This catastrophic delay allowed the trail to run cold. It provided Carter with an invaluable head start, giving him ample time to dispose of the body, scrub away digital and physical evidence, and rehearse his fabricated alibi. Ultimately, the devastating combination of a severely decomposed body and the glaring missteps of the early police investigation created a perfect storm of injustice, plunging Katelyn Markham's case into a seemingly impenetrable deep freeze and allowing a killer to walk the streets as a free man for 12 long years. The final crack of the judge's gavel may have formally concluded the criminal proceedings against John Carter, but for the Markham family, the end of the trial did not equate to peace. In the true crime lexicon, the word closure is often thrown around as the ultimate goal of a conviction. Yet, for Katelyn's grieving father, Dave Markham, and her devoted sister, closure remains a cruel, unattainable illusion. While Carter's guilty plea finally validated their decade-long suspicions, it brought a hollow victory. Because Carter cowardly refused to detail the events of August 13, 2011, the family is condemned to a lifetime of agonizing questions. They will never truly know how Katelyn's final moments unfolded, what her last words were, or exactly how she was taken from this world. By choosing absolute silence and taking the truth with him to his prison cell, Carter has exerted one final, deeply sadistic measure of control over the people he destroyed. Adding immeasurable insult to this enduring trauma is the maddening legal loophole that allowed Carter to escape full accountability for his depravity. Beyond taking Katelyn's life, Carter callously desecrated her remains, wrapping her body in plastic and discarding her in a remote Indiana creek bed like trash. Under normal circumstances, this horrific act would warrant severe additional felony charges, such as desecration of a corpse and tampering with evidence. However, Carter successfully exploited a glaring flaw in the judicial system, the statute of limitations, because he managed to keep Katelyn's body perfectly hidden for 20 months, and successfully evaded arrest for 12 years. The legal time limit for prosecutors to file those specific secondary charges in the state of Ohio had completely expired. In a twisted miscarriage of justice, the law essentially rewarded the killer for being highly effective at covering his tracks. He outwaited the clock, using the passage of time as an impenetrable legal shield. Rather than succumbing to despair over this profound systemic failure, the Markham family is transforming their heartbreak into a fierce legislative crusade. Channeling his grief into relentless advocacy, Dave Markham is spearheading a movement to pass new legislation aptly named Katelyn's Law. This proposed legal reform is specifically designed to close the very loophole that Carter so arrogantly exploited. Katelyn's Law seeks to alter the statute of limitations in cases involving missing persons and concealed homicides. If passed, it would legally mandate that the ticking clock on charges like desecration of a corpse or tampering with evidence does not begin until the victim's remains are actually discovered and identified. rather than the date the crime was committed. This legislative battle ensures that Katelyn's legacy will not be defined solely by the tragedy of her murder or the meager 3-year sentence handed to her killer. Instead, her name has become a powerful catalyst for systemic reform. Through Katelyn's law, her family is fighting a valiant war for the future, determined to guarantee that no other perpetrator can ever again weaponize time to escape the full wrath of justice.